Rosetta, Rosetta, nell'etere brilli tu, come ponte tra passato e futuro, nelle parole dei tempi, leggi il mondo.
Caro Gabriele,
Eccoci.
Siamo tornati questa settimana con un appuntamento bisettimanale, anche se bisettimanale vuol dire un'altra cosa.
Vuol dire un'altra cosa.
Ma questi sono
Un doppio appuntamento settimanale.
Problemi della lingua italiana. Siamo tornati questa settimana con un ospite nuovamente internazionale, an international guest, with Esperanza Miyake. Nice to meet you. Thank you for being here, Esperanza. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome to Rosetta, our podcast dedicated to new technologies, media, and imaginaries connected with them. Today, we would like to talk with you about your new last book, which is a very brand new book, I'd say.
Super brand new.
I'm going to show you the cover of the book, whose name is Virtual Influencers, Identity and Digitality in the Age of Multiple Realities.
Routledge
book, so it's already a guarantee of the quality of the book, but we had the occasion to read it, so we know we can confirm that that quality, because it's a very dense book, I'd say, Gabriele.
Definitely.
Of course, very which goes very deeply into this new new theme of the virtual influencing, but of course with a vast panorama of issues related to the contemporary mediascape. Before going and exploring the book through our curiosity, as usually, Esperanza, Gabriele used to do a brief profile of our guests in order to introduce them to our audience. So please, Gabriele.
Thank you, Bruno. We are very, very super glad to have Esperanza here with us today, because when we saw that the book was about to be published, we immediately booked her. Immediately. Esperanza is a Chancellor's Fellow and Senior Lecturer in Journalism, Media and Communication at the Strathclyde University in Glasgow. Virtual Influencers is her most recent monograph, and we're going to focus on that. But I would like also to address her first book. I think it's her first book, which is very interesting, entitled Gendered Motorcycle. So we're gonna delve into this apparently really strange topic as well. And the second book by Esperanza is editorship. She co-edited a book called Digital Disengagement, which is something again super interesting for us, for what we have studied and what we've been working on, dealing with communication and online communication, which is focused on COVID and what happened during and afterwards. This game changer, as I said also last time with our guest Sharona Perl.
Gabriele, there are also COVID traces in this new book.
Definitely.
So COVID is accompanying Esperanza's research, and this is quite interesting. Maybe we can go deeply in it later. Sorry.
No. Yes, but maybe Esperanza, if you we can start with a couple of questions, and maybe it's a good way to start with this issue that you just addressed, Bruno. So you are a communication researcher with a focus on technology and online ecology. What you have addressed in the subtitle of Virtual Influencers as digitality. You also have a key, crystal clear interest in gender issues. So I maybe in an intersectional perspective. And I would like to start with the thing of the COVID. So Esperanza, you definitely, since you've been studying communication in the last years, and this is clear from the book Digital Disengagement, which is full of very different topics regarding communication. I think you wrote the chapter about the Tokyo Olympics in that book. So the idea is, was actually COVID a game changer regarding communication and engagement and disengagement, mediation, hypermediation, and disintermediation, according to what you have studied, to your research?
Yeah, okay. So thank you for that question. So I think previously, before the edited collection that you mentioned, there was I don't know if you saw it, there's a monograph I co-authored with one of my collaborators, Adi Kunzman, and that book was about, we started to write it just before the pandemic. So at that point we were resisting, or actually trying to think about the increasing proliferation, not just of digitality, but the fact that digital had become a default. So there was this idea that we have to engage with digital. So if we want to talk to friends, we need to engage with the digital. If we want to, I don't know, pay our taxes or do, issues to do with citizenship, we had to be online. And there was this, we were afraid of this sudden kind of, digital compulsivity and compulsory digitality. So that's where we started. But as we started to write it, the pandemic kicked in. And suddenly, digitality became a form of survival, or this idea of, for those who had access to digitality, right? And suddenly digital engagement was no longer just about just cost cutting or issues to do with time saving, but it actually became about containing the virus. It actually became an issue of life and death. So the way society could keep going throughout the crisis. So I think that kind of changed our position a little bit, or made us think about that tension between necessity of digitality, but also kind of what kind of inequalities are exacerbated through the necessity of digitality. So for example, in the case of the pandemic, everyone's like, great, we need to go online and do, work continues online, children are educated if they're online. But then what about those who are not online? So those the workers who are, people in the hospitals, or people delivering food or packing, those who are putting their lives at risk, who can't engage digitally. What about them? So these kind of exacerbations about who has the right and who has the access and the resources to engage and disengage were kind of brought to the forefront. I think what the pandemic did was actually, in some ways, visibilize certain inequalities as well as create new ones. So I don't know. For me, the interesting thing was when suddenly the pandemic, everyone was complaining about Zoom fatigue and there's too much digitality, la. But these were sort of things like, Uber drivers, for example, precarious workers who were, app workers. They don't have the capacity to disengage. And this is pre-pandemic. So that was really interesting, at least for me, how the pandemic actually suddenly, when dominant, the privileged suddenly experienced over digitality in a way that those who were not so privileged were experiencing it before the pandemic. Sorry, that's just a massive rant. I'm sorry, I tend to rant a lot. So, but that was my response.
We do the same.
Okay, that's right. Everyone rants. That's fine.
Just one small thing, Bruno. I was precisely thinking of the word privilege because you were describing perfectly this semantic area. And also the thing you were discussing is what we used to call for decades digital gap. But obviously you are kind of saying that on the one hand, it was just a booster of what already happened before the pandemic, what happened during the pandemic. But at the same time, you were addressing that new things started being generated from this situation, which is maybe the point in which we can insert our interest for this apparently strange phenomenon, but on the other end, I think it's just an hyperbole of what already happened before these figures appeared in the public sphere, which is the virtual influencer thing. So, Bruno, if you agree,
I agree.
Okay,
I do agree.
I think we can start delving into these. We read the book, but maybe our audience didn't, for obvious reason, because it's a very recent publication. So, Esperanza, I would kindly ask you if you would really briefly and freely at the same time outline how such a thing can be a thing, and how did it start, this thing of the virtual influencers that started not so many years ago. Actually, it's a recent phenomenon on, if we think of the big periods of communication and communication studies. So it's something really new.
You mean the actual phenomenon itself, right?
Yes.
So I think virtual influencers as a named thing, I'd say mid 2000s, 2015, about 2015 thereabouts. Like you get the majority coming out between mid 2000s to, sorry, I keep saying mid 2000s, 2010s. So about 2015, 2018, 19, between that span, there were suddenly loads of virtual influencers who are basically actively kind of named as virtual influencers. So media started to pick up on it. So you had newspapers, online news articles saying, look, it's the new virtual influencers. So I'd say as that kind of named phenomenon, it is 2000, sort of mid 2010s. But I would also quickly add that there were virtual figures who were influential in media before that, right? So I think Ludo Magalu, who's one of the virtual influencers I discuss in the book, is Brazilian sort of virtual figure who's almost like a brand ambassador or brand spokesperson for Magalu, the sort of almost like the Amazon big retail company in Brazil. So she was there before sort of this, the named virtual influencer, acting as kind of spokesperson, had social media account before all that. And you can even take it even further back. So there were like virtual pop idols in Japan. So in the 90s, there were virtual pop stars, Yuki Terai, I think, who had a CD. I don't know, Hatsune Miku,
yes.
Vocaloid, who was, a virtual pop star and hologram, and it was all, So I think before virtual influencers as a named entity, you can trace back quite a history of virtual characters who are on media and part of the media landscape who are influencing sales. So whether it's music, CDs, or, it's what you consider, but, like gorillas, for example, as well. Some people might say Max Headroom. All these are kind of virtual figures. But so I think, it's a sort of, there's a history there. But I think in terms of them being social media influencers, I'd say, it's a recent phenomenon, or relatively recent. I'm aging very quickly because 2015 is like 10 years.
100 years ago.
So maybe it's not that recent. But
Well, if you like, I will go on with this part, because first of all, let me say that I truly appreciate your work, generally your work, because I see it as an attempt to dismantle a certain rhetoric of communication. So when you say during the COVID, there was, it seemed that the main issues related with digitality was the so-called Zoom fatigue, while behind the idea of digitality, there was a hidden idea of sociality with a very evident but also hidden system of inequalities. This is a way to work on the rhetoric of digitality. And again, I think your work on influencers and virtual influencers help us to understand again the fact that this dichotomy between reality and virtuality is a fake dichotomy. Of course, our society is proving us that we can empathize with non-ontological beings, but very phenomenological ones.
Purely semiotic ones, in a certain way.
Semiotic and phenomenal. In some way, when there is a semiotic, there is, of course, implied a phenomenology. I'm noticing, and also I'm noticing more after reading your book, how people can create affective bondings with this kind of entities. Of course, this was narrated many times by cinema, by literature. Nowadays, we are exploring it as a new reality. Of course, with artificial intelligence, is going to grow more and more. I saw recently these programs made with AI, which can create your own fiancé or boyfriend very, very realistically. So, of course, this is quite obvious for someone who study this kind of field. But I think that if we want to communicate it to the common sense, to the people outside academia, we must push this button and say that probably we are already in a post-human era where we can feel something for someone who is not made by flesh, but it's made by algorithms and microchips and whatever you want.
These are really narrative beings.
Yeah.
The most important thing is the story, the affection. I would just like to add, there is a strong continuity between things that were not digital at all. For example, catfish. The idea that you could fall in love for someone you never met at all, and maybe you never saw in the face, also on video, and the app that you were describing just a few seconds ago. There is a really strong connection between all these things.
So one of the things is the idea of emotion, our perspective on emotion as something really human-centered. And of course, AI cannot prove any kind of feelings, but humans can feel something for digital or algorithmic or virtual influence. So can you outline your perspective on this issue, which is to me one of the main issues nowadays?
Yeah, so I think, sorry, I'm scribbling. It's really funny. It's all digital, and I'm writing with a fountain pen on paper here. It's very analog, so apologies. I'm looking down. So it's really interesting what you say about semiotic and phenomenological and these kind of affective. And I mentioned parasociality in the book and this idea of people really connecting. And there's so many, when I was doing a lot of the research, people like Michaela, who, when I say people, sorry, virtual influencers like Michaela, the number of times, one of the things that really drew me is that her just narratives, her confessional, the way she is presented is very effective. She's crying, she's in pain, the very effective discourse. And what was interesting, I'm just reflecting on what you said, Bruno, is that the comments were equally, so there were loads of comments like, oh, I wish I was there with you, you're there, don't worry, girl, you've got this, and very, very deep, sort of deep connections with the virtual influencers. And I think one of the things that you said about AI as well, this relates to this idea. I'm sure you know of this new phenomenon of people falling in love with ChatGPT, and so I think what for me is interesting here is actually the algorithmic side, because virtual influencers, there's a lot of analysis conducted online, deep machine analytics, to pick out certain demographic, what they're interested in, what the sort of how they speak, and that's actually then incorporated into how they're presented. So this is something I call in the book affective echo chambers, but it's this idea that the virtual influencers in some ways reflect back the emotions that are online. So in effect, we're very narcissistically responding to the emotions that we are producing, if that makes sense. So that goes back to this idea that social media is an affective sphere. We we post things, we say, oh, I've broken up with my boyfriend today, or whatever, all these things, and that's just being reflected back to us in a very conceited, conscious way and this is the thing, virtual influencers are actually, there's a team of designers there's a team going online and doing sentiment analysis. It's very, very constructed. It's fiction. It's designed so that there is an effective response. You could say that all influencers do that to a certain extent. But I think the difference here is that they are, like, in that way, they're like what you said, they're like film or cinema. They are fictional characters, but because they are in social media, they're presented as not film. It's almost like social media is meant to be this is the kind of thing that David Marshall says is like between presentation and representational media. But social media is kind of, we take that as a medium where it's real, and I put that in inverted commas, as opposed to novels or films, which are fictional. But actually, virtual influencers are at the in-between stage of being on a real platform with real people talking and interacting with them in real life, but they're actually fictional. So I think that's where effective is the emotionality is a tool to blur that sort of to collapse that difference between what is fictional and not fictional. And I think that's why they're so powerful. And actually, one thing that I'm particularly critical and scared of is that it's actually very much tied to the economy, right? So this is social media. This is going back to the emotions and the effective economy. These are platforms, the social media platforms that use connectivity for monetary gain. So in that way, virtual influencers are part of that very capitalistic social media capitalism, if you like, that monetizes on affect. So I think it's beyond, it uses semiotics, it uses visual, it uses meaning, but for monetary gain. And I think that's the bit that virtual influencers, because they're pretty and they're very engaging, they don't necessarily, it hides all that kind of side to social media. I think that it's based all on that, on social analytics and engagement between users based on affect.
Esperanza, you said the word which was very thought-provoking to me, which was narcissism.
Yeah.
Because, we are full of discourses about narcissism today. Of course, we live in a narcissistic society. Our mediascape is structured, architectured to elicit our narcissistic pulses and so on. But I'd never reflect on this idea that contemporary artificial intelligence systems are made to speak as me, and to, for example, ChatGPT states that it wants to speak in my favorite way, So it's a kind of mirror, not of only of myself, but also of my linguistic habits. And the application I was talking before about, the one you can create your own AI fiancé, is sold as an application to masturbate. So for a specific purpose, which is basically to do sex with yourself. So again, all these technologies are in some way, I don't want to be so obvious to say Black Mirror in order to refer to the very famous TV series. But anyway, this narcissism is imbued in our linguistic habits and copied by technologies is very interesting. Just to say that I loved your answer, but Gabriele, if you want to add something, then we go.
Yes. I think you are addressing the idea that they are narcissistic because they are solipsistic, because they are really in a closed system, in a closed circle that is completely focusing on the idea of self-satisfaction, and so they are really.
There is no a real otherness.
Yes.
There is, but there is not in the same way. It's paradoxical. There are other. There is an alternative, but of course that alternative is constructed, simulating.
So as to yes. I think that it's really interesting what Esperanza was saying regarding the idea that a strong and, again, maybe not so explicit feature of these virtual influencers is to mirror what already was happening and making it more explicit and visible. And I would say that this phenomenon is like a natural outcome of what already came before, obviously with new things as well, but it just it just stemming from the context. It's so, if we think of that, it's so obvious that a thing such as virtual influencers happens in our digital ecological system. I just wanted to add something, because you super pertinently mentioned Hatsune Miku. Hatsune Miku is a key character. I love a lot the story and all the things regarding Hatsune Miku that you analyze in a few pages in the book. And it's interesting also that you mentioned gorillas and other virtual bands and performers, because there is the interesting difference between virtual influencers whose genealogy and phylogeny you reconstructed. So it's something that was named really recently on the one hand. On the other hand, it was a phenomenon already happening before, a few years ago. And it's interesting that all these virtual performers in music were really thoroughly studied by specialists. For example, I'm thinking of Nicholas Cook, David Trippett, who edited a beautiful handbook about digital and music, and there are 2 chapters about Hatsune Miku. Or there is Shara Rambaran, who worked a lot on the virtual and music. So that was studied a lot, and maybe it's a niche phenomenon. On the other hand, there was this growing field of virtual influencers, and it's fantastic to say that your monograph is the first one in the field, actually. So maybe there were some papers, some small things, but not something so comprehensive, organically focused on this topic. But this was just a context and a bridge for my next question, which is a really it's a really
we speak a lot because we are interested in the thing. So
we are also logoroic, obviously. The question is, Esperanza, do you feel that there is a kind of reversed, again, mirroring exoticism in this virtual influencer thing? Also because the very first phenomenon, the very first cases, but also the most famous one, maybe, come from Japan or South Korea. Do you feel that there is a thing in between this kind of reflected or inverted exoticism on the one end, and on the other, there is something, there is a geographical specificity, a genius loci in these places that bring to something so paradoxical like a virtual influencer in these cultures? Do you feel that there is this component, or is something that we from Italy, again, maybe in an exotic way, we project our
very Italo-centric,
our biases or ideologies on this geographical component?
So when you say you mean like the virtual influencers exoticize themselves? Is that what you mean?
Yes, that there is
I mean, not to anthropomorphize these figures, but yes, I think if I understand what you're saying, You mean like whether geography plays a role? Is that what kind of what you're
Yes,
saying?
yes.
Yeah.
It was a complex way to say why there is such a huge concentration of these figures from Japan and South Korea is something cultural, and so if it's
Oh, I
cultural,
see. Specifically East Asia. Yeah. So, well, I think certainly in terms of within East Asia, there, and especially I think Japan as well, there's been a history of commodifying virtuality, right? Within the media, I've already mentioned the likes of Yuki Terai, Hatsune Miku. There's already an industry, and I think a culture of falling in love or for thinking it's normal to. I think talking about Hatsune Miku, there was I know it was a very unique case, but a man who married. I think it's in the book, but he married Hatsune Miku. He married a hologram and did the marriage ceremony. And okay, I'm not saying that's what was considered normal in Japan, but I think culturally, this idea of technology and consuming virtual figures has already been there, if that's what you mean. But I think in terms of whether you mean more geographically, I would actually say that this is now, if you look at the landscape of virtual influencers right now, they're for every country almost. Well, yeah. Lots of countries have them. And that's one of the things a whole chapter I discuss, is that there is a strange neo-colonialist kind of race towards territorializing virtuality. So every country seems to have their own virtual. So if you go to their profiles, it's very much like, I don't know. So you get, I don't know, France's first virtual influencer, South Africa's first virtual influencer, India's number one for India. There's always, that's actually a thing. The claiming of the geography is actually a point. So for me, the way I've conceptualized in the book is this idea that there's every brand, there's a virtuality becomes a form of stylization and branding of a country. So talk about exoticization. There's a lot of self-exoticization per country. So if you look at virtual influences from their own countries, I'll just take Japan as because we're talking about it, but Imma is the famous one there, or there's other ones like Rin, Zen and Ria, and there's other ones, but I'll take her because she's quite popular. There's lots of kimonos and Mount Fuji, and there's a lot of self-orientalization there, right?
in a stereotypical way, in a cliche.
Yeah, very, very cliche, but that happens everywhere. So I think that's one of the, I think it's Kira, India, national independence, there's flags waving. It's lots of these virtual influencers that it's nationalistic discourses, that celebrate the country and showcase the country. So I think, yes, you're right. Maybe at the beginning, a lot were from East Asia, but I would suggest now that lots of countries are wanting their own brand of virtual influencer to act as almost like national ambassadors to tell the country's story, almost like tourism, because a lot of them, it's almost like tourism brochures, right? A little bit. So I think geography is a big part in general.
I think we are talking more than geography about cultural geographies.
Yeah.
Of course, my hypothesis is that this first very East Asia features were connected with the rise of animes and mangas and many of these kind of semiotic objects, which of course filled some gap in the Western countries in animation, in juvenile cultures, and so on and so forth. So probably that one was one of the sparks. But the second thing you said, Esperanza, about this war for territorializing the entire world with these virtual influencers, a kind of meta world behind our world, suggests me to ask you something about this idea of liquidity. which is inside your book, which of course recalls Zygmunt Bauman's idea of liquid society and liquid modernity. Lots of liquids in Bauman's theory, but which I always found as a very good metaphor to represent globalization, not only or not merely as an economical transformation of the world, but also as a cultural transformation of the world. So can you briefly, or not briefly, outline your perspective on liquidity, please?
Right. So in relation to what we were just talking about in terms of geography, I think there is a tendency to see online as this global, internet's global, and this is to overlook the regionalized aspects of that, right? Whether it's through governance or through cultural practices, online digitality is not as universal as we think it is, and I think virtual influences in that way, in the world where it sort of liquid, if you like, universal, creating is a result of this desire to create demarcations. But I think, so in terms of liquid reality, yes, totally, I'm borrowing from Bauman and this idea of liquidity. But for me, the reason why I thought of liquid reality is because I saw the simultaneous splintering of different realities, but also the convergence of them. So we've got reality, virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and the whole thing is, and that is becoming more and more just part, whether it's filters added onto mobile phone screens or, the augmented reality games, the metaverse, all these are just increasingly part of life, right? Then we multi-screen, but we not only multi-screen, we weave in and out of different realities. So for me, there's that sense of no longer is it just reality and virtual reality, it's becoming even more splintered. So on the one hand, there is a kind of fragmentation of reality, but simultaneously a convergence of them. So this sort of splintering, but so the virtual influences occupy that perfect space of different realities coming together. So for me, it's the liquefaction of reality, in the meaning that it kind of creates different streams, if you like, but all converge together, bringing their own, through. And that's when I say convergence, I mean that in the sense of technological, audience convergence, media, it's just the come together through different forms of reality. So I think that the virtual influences are a product of that, but are also the facilitators or our ways to navigate between those different realities. So I think it's, I don't know if that answered your question or,
You answered well.
I think that this specific perspective on this phenomenon of virtual influencers is a key one. The idea that they are the epitome of what we may conceive today as in-betweenness. They are in between because they are not on the metaverse. They are acting because they have agency. Definitely they have, and maybe also intentionality behind them. There is a clear orientation towards something. You were addressing the platform capitalism in a certain sense a few minutes ago. So they are in between. Maybe we can say that they are, as semiotic beings that have a materiality and an economicity behind them. They are forms of quasi-life or something like that. They are really in between. But at the same time, there is a strong, they are marked. They are, they have some striking features. And for example, I would say that they have a common style in the way in which they are designed, obviously. And I was wondering also, but it's another silly question like the geographical one, but I want to hear your voice on that. There is a gender issue in virtual influencers. There is they are not gender balanced at all. there is a strong connotation on the female side of
Yeah,
the.
absolutely. Yeah.
There is a sexual issue more than a gender issue.
Definitely,
I think,
there is a strong sexualization of these figures, which is implicit in what you were again addressing a few minutes ago, Bruno, regarding the virtual dating app, and I referenced Catfish a few minutes ago. So there is a strong sexualization, and there is a kind of digital male gaze projected onto them. I don't know if you agree on this perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there is. This is something I mentioned in the book at the start about the subject, the history of the subject and the object, and we have a history of men creating women. So men creating women through the virtual technological other, whether it's Fritz Lang's Metropolis in Maria, or more. I'm totally sorry. I have to always make a reference to Blade Runner because it's always my favorite film and franchise. But Joy, there's always this kind of male fantasy and the male gaze to create the idealized sort of female other through.
The digital Pygmalion in a certain way.
Yeah, a digital Pygmalion, the digital Galatea, yes, to create, yeah. So there's definitely a history of that, and that's the interesting point. You're totally right about the in-betweenness, because you actually even said they have agency and they have intentionality. They don't actually. They're performing it. There's somebody else who's creating. But that's the point, isn't it? They're presented as subjects. And this is what I was saying earlier, because they're on social media, we tend to go into the platform as these are, we go into social media thinking these are real people posting about real things. That's been what social media has been about. So when you place a fictional character within such a platform, which is seen as reality and not fictional, that becomes an interesting in-between point of presented as subject but equally an object. And I suppose you could say that about any influencer, right, whether they're virtual or not. But the difference there is a real influencer, they do have some kind of agency in the way, obviously I would say that some really successful influencers also are marketed, and they have a whole team of people who make them, these are human influencers, look and present in a certain way, almost like traditional celebrities, right, manufactured almost. But there's still some kind of agency, and I think the virtual influencer, there is no, it's truly created. And I think that's one of the things that always does, like throughout the book, that bothered me when I was researching, is who is creating this, right? So you get, what does it matter if like a white male is creating a black presenting female virtual influencer who's very idealized, very normative, very, and this goes back again to this idea of the research conducted, what's appealing to, so it is about the majority. Right. So that, I think that, yeah, so that's and definitely it's very, very gendered. So you're right. There's more female presenting virtual influencers than they are male, and they are presented in a very typical magazine, normative, pretty, slim, the usual not always sexualized, but, the idealized forms of femininity.
At least potentially sexualized, potentially. Sorry. I was saying they are potentially, they are prone to sexualization.
Yeah. But in a way, just like magazines. So in that way, we are closer to films, advertising, that area of visual medium, where people, like virtual influencers are presented in their most idealized, potentially sexualized, fetishized way in the case of female presenting virtual influencers for the heterosexual male gaze. But there are exceptions there. Like I think I write about Cami, who's sort of first Down syndrome virtual influencer, who's created out of, I think, images of 100 women with Down syndrome and composite. So, to challenge and create a more diverse world of virtual influencers. But I mean, that's like, I'm using, it is the exception to the rule there. Like the majority are, the usual heterosexy, I think is a Dobson's term for it. But yeah, girls.
Esperanza, I have a double question for you, and then I'm finished.
I'll give you a double answer.
And then I'm finished with my question. So I promise it's, but I want to exploit your patience as more as possible. So the first part of my double question is really connected with the book. The shortest chapter in your book, chapter 5, is called Virtual Biocapitalism.
Oh, okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Digital skin, melanin, and racialized biodata. Of course, the title of the chapter is quite self-explanatory, but I found it very inspiring. Your book is very inspiring, Esperanza, so thank you. Because you talk about the issue of the color, which is quite underestimated when we think of online creatures. Of course, online we can have access to many colors. The idea of coloring is, very free. You can have an ideal person in every color you want. But of course, there is a semantics of coloring also online. So I think you identified a really a good point when you say that there is a kind of datafication of races through the colors online and on digital virtual influencer. Of course, it's not a question, it's just a
stimulus.
Yeah, a stimulus, let's say, an attempt to have something from your direct voice on it. The second part of the question is more epistemological. So it's a question I ask not only to you, but to all of us. So it's about our tendency to collocate ourselves in a dystopian frame when we analyze this kind of technologies. And I think it's a very common tendency in academia during these years. So there is a part, and I think it's the technical part, which is very enthusiastic. So computer science researchers, new technology researchers, who of course are happy when this kind of novelties happens, because these are the results of the research made by someone. While in the humanities,
there is a critical approach.
Yeah, we use a critical approach, and again, I've seen there is a dystopic epistemology. So we start by that kind of perspective. My hypothesis, as a citizen, I think we are doing good.
This is a provocation, Bruno.
Yeah, it's a provocation to all of us.
Or intervention, yeah,
or an intervention. As a citizen, I think we are doing a good job. But as an academician, I'm asking myself if this is not a proof of a kind of epistemological bias we are starting from. So is there another way to put the question which does not involve the dystopia, which of course we interiorly take from movies and from media experiences we have. You said Esperanza, Blade Runner is your favorite movie, and of course it's one of my favorite too. But this says something about your way to see this kind of things. And we are all contaminated by the science fiction we watched, the books we read, and so on and so forth. So the first question is about colors, and okay, the second one is the final provocation, let's say.
Can I do a small name dropping for our audience? Because actually, you are right. I may actually not agree regarding the second part, the epistemological question. But if we read the most influential authors in this field, they are all against this kind of technologies from very different perspectives, but they agree on the point of being hypercritical. Bifo, Sneerczek, Morozov, Zubov, Byung-Chul, Loving, and many others that I'm not mentioning. So I think that this is something that appeals on the one hand to our zeitgeist, the fact that we live in a society in which we have such a thing as virtual influencers. But you are definitely right. There is this kind of vocation in humanities / social sciences to project this kind of, to cut long story short, negativity towards technology.
Darkness.
Yeah, it's like
a shadow.
It's like a Heideggerian heritage that we are. At the same time, I think that there are some points toward the idea that since technology is not neutral, we may add. We were talking, for example, about designed, engineered affection and stuff like that. This is something that is critical, but actually it's more dealing with a scientific approach. So you detect that there is no neutrality and you have to address it. But I want to definitely hear.
My premise was, I think we are right.
We are right as citizens.
Yeah,
okay.
We are right. But if you are not right.
Yes. You are good point. Thought-provoking, Bruno. Thought-provoking. But I want to hear Esperanza on this conundrum of stuff that we. Sorry.
No. My thought. Yes, I am provoked. My thought is provoked. So I'll start with the first bit about the colorization. You said there was no question. So my only response to that would be that yes, I think I was horrified about with the sort of this idea of certain artificial human creating software in places were very much like, hey, choose a skin color, black, white. It actually literally said black, white, yellow, red, but totally normally it's commercialized. People buy this and trade this, and for me, it's almost sort of the classification of bodies, right? Especially if they're actually biodata. So lots of places say these are taken from actual human data, so human skin, and so that has connotations when the coloring is actually based on actual human subjects, even if they give consent, because that's within the context of surveillance and biometric data being used to classify people, whether in borders or all that. That's actually a very scary thought, that virtual humans, including virtual influencers, and the creation of it, although it's seen as creative and photorealistic and but actually we shouldn't forget the fact that these are the same systems and programs that it doesn't exist in just a bubble of creativity, that there's other, as I said, border control, surveillance has these same sort of systems and ways of using biometric data. I think Nakamura calls it social analytics or social algorithms, but they can't be divorced from that kind of world. So, and I think, that's all I will say for that. The second bit, I agree, but I also disagree. So from my perspective, I'm just being purely selfish here. I'm going to say, I actually don't have a problem with the technologies. So I think I agree with you that I think maybe humanities and sort of we tend to just be doom and gloom. Maybe just all sci-fi geeks, I don't know, and see the world darkly, maybe. But I think the critique, so there has always been throughout the time fear of the other, anything new. So whether it's Victorians and machines, or and machines have always been the other, right? There's a fear of the other and change. But I think for me, at least, it's not critiquing the technologies, it's the way the technologies are used. So I'm critiquing society by using technology and how it's being used and weaponized. So for me, I'm less critical of the technologies. I'm critical of people, I think, and society. So that's I don't know if that
very elegant
responds to that.
Please, clear.
Very elegant.
Yeah. So virtual influencers are not critiquing them. In fact, they have nothing. They don't even have agency, right? But it's how that's used. So again, there's a lot about AI and bias, and that it's not AI that's biased. It's the humans that decided to use it, to design it in a certain way, or it's whatever the content that's online. That's, the majority that creates certain bias, societal bias. It's not the technology. So I think that's important to not so much critique the technology, but critique who made it. The practices surrounding it, the people who designed it, the production methods, the consumption methods, who's using it, why are they using it? That is the point of critique. So I think in that way we should use technology to critique the citizen, or the citizen. You said us, to question us. Because they just, technologies. I think in that way they are neutral, but they're not neutral because we aren't.
I think it's like
I'm happy with that.
The perfect punchline for this episode. Esperanza, we almost got to 1 hour. Around you with our words.
Very.
And I think that this last point was really the best way to conclude our humble and humble exploration of your book, which is beautiful, and we definitely advise to our audience. It was published in August officially, so it's brand new, and it's a pillar of this field, definitely. So Esperanza, thanks a lot for being with us.
Thank you so much for today. I really enjoyed it, and really been great to talk to both of you.
It was a pleasure to have the possibility to ask you about our obsessions regarding technology and stuff, because that's the point, actually. So thanks a lot. Please stay with us also after the jingle, so we can say goodbye.
I like the jingle, by the way. I thought it was...
Yeah, actually, we like it as well, even though we have to acknowledge that it's terrible at the same time. And I switch to Italia in order to address our next episode. Il prossimo episodio sarà il 17 ottobre con Federica Buongiorno.
Traduttrice ufficiale di...
Per lungo tempo, she was the official Italian translator of Byung-Chul Han, and this is the first part of the interesting thing. On the other hand, she's a specialist in aesthetics and the relationship between aesthetics, philosophy, and technology. So we are really delving again in the same topics, but with different people, and we want to hear their voices. So, ci vediamo il 17 ottobre. Sempre alle 5 del pomeriggio, torniamo al nostro vecchio orario. Grazie mille. Grazie mille, Esperanza.
Thank you very much, Esperanza.
Grazie.
Ciao.
Rosetta, nell'etere brilli tu.